Hello and welcome to the Bright Living Podcast. This is Emma and I will be your host today. In this episode, we have as our guest Alan Moore, who is both an artist, a creator of businesses, and a lover of beauty. Not just physical beauty, but emotional, soulful, and spiritual one. As a business innovator, Alan Moore's life mission is to make every business on this planet as beautiful as it can possibly be. He does this by changing the way people think about the world and how their businesses can succeed by being beautiful in every single way. By consciously designing better products, services, experiences, and by creating cultures of learning internally, as well as creating entirely new concepts of what a business or an industry could be, beautiful businesses are proven to be attractive to employees, buyers, and investors. Alan is described as lovingly disruptive because he offers his clients a viable creative vision of what their businesses can become, while at the same time keeping them honest and true to the core values. Alan has worked on 6 continents and designed and created everything from books to businesses. In the form of board and advisory positions, he has worked with many companies including PayPal, Microsoft, and Interface. In today's episode, I am thrilled to discover the person behind Beautiful Business and to hear about the journey of internal transformation, of finding beauty within and without, as well as supporting others on their journey. Let's welcome together Alan Moore. Welcome, Alan. How are you?
Hello, and I'm very well, Emma. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, which I'm very much looking forward to speaking with you.
Thank you, Alan, for taking the time. And guys, you have to know that Alan likes to take people for a walk in nature. And it might be a virtual walk, it might be an actual walk. And in today's podcast, I really want for us to set together that we are going on a walk and we are going on a journey and having a friendly and just a beautiful conversation. Alan, when I read your bio, something that really stuck with me was you being described as, I think it was lovingly disruptive. Could you tell us a bit more about that? What does that mean? And I see already your face lighting up, so you clearly resonate with that description. Can you tell us more about it?
I think that in my life, the work that I've done, I've always quested for the best possible outcome that could be created. It's really a kind of artist's position in the world, I think. And almost by default, if I'm then working on a project, I'm kind of pushing for the thing that I think is the very best that we can achieve. But quite often what that means is that you are disrupting a whole range of things around you. And in a sense, actually, you're taking people perhaps quite a way out of their comfort zone, but it's not obvious to me that that's what I'm doing. Because I would ask the question, why would we only want 10% or 50% of what is the best outcome rather than striving for 100%? So there's that part of it, which is the sort of like the doing, I suppose, in many ways. And, so there's that. And then the other bit is the questioning and the asking of the questions. And again, through the writing of the books, I mean, even, writing about beauty, for example, or applying that to business, you're taking people, yes, on a bit of a journey, which is just challenging what they believe to be true, what they believe to be possible, how they might frame the world. And I try and do all of that in a compassionate way, because all I'm trying to do is to make the world a slightly better place. And I suppose I'm become unreasonable when I feel that others aren't really pushing as hard as they could or should be to achieve that outcome. So I think that's the best answer I can give you to that question.
As you're giving them a loving challenge, let's say. Mhm.
That's the one.
And I suppose you can see most of the times that the outcome of that is a lot better than if one had just stuck to the status quo.
Yeah, it's kind of just not part of my DNA, really. And as I say, I think that we all have an opportunity in this world every day to make the world a better place than the one that we currently have. And so to do that, we have to be unreasonable. Um, we have to imagine that which is possibly seen as not possible, but in a sense, that is the kind of the creative endeavor that we must be on. You know, that's the bit where for me it gets exciting, and working out how you achieve that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it just speaks to the complexity of you. Yeah. So when I think about you, I think of an artist, I think of a builder. And you were speaking about your DNA. It really makes me curious. How was your DNA shaped throughout the years, throughout your life history? Were there any moments that have really marked or have really shaped who you have become today or your values?
Mm. Well, in terms of my values, I kind of really look at my home life and my parents, and we were just brought up in a household which I think they both had a very strong sense of an ethical way of being in the world. You know, you didn't do bad to other people, you didn't steal, you didn't lie.
Mm.
It was just their behavior, and I think that that was something that was, you know, was marked on me. I find it very difficult when I see when others do bad things to other people, and knowingly so. I mean, of course, we all, you know, we all hurt people. We all do things that, you know, are sometimes not the right thing to do. But there's a difference between doing that knowingly and doing that unknowingly, I think. I played a lot of sport as a young man, but I got injured quite young, and I literally played sport every day. And it was like I had to really ask myself the question, what is it then that really drives me? What's the driver in me that is my voice? And it was a really interesting moment because I kind of suddenly sat down and realized that, you know, here I am writing poems, writing stories, playing the guitar, writing songs. I'm very aesthetically, you know, engaged with the world. And I realized that all of that was to do with creativity.
Mm.
And that was a big choice because, in a sense, you know, I grew up in a household where my parents were wartime educated, and you know, my dad left school at 14. He was very dyslexic. You know, he'd always worked, but both worked really hard, but they couldn't comprehend that you could get a job being creative. That's just
Mm.
wasn't part of, you know. So, and then obviously growing up in a world where there was a lot of fear and uncertainty, it's you need a job that's going to be steady and stable and safe. So, you know, accountancy or, you know, a surveyor or working in a bank. And it's like, you know, so there was this real clash. So for me to really kind of go against that and say, no, this is who I am, this is what makes me who I am, was a really big choice. But it was absolutely the right one. And, you know, I sort of, you know, then worked my way into all of that, and actually pretty much self-taught. I was self-taught in terms of how I became a creative individual, an artist, a designer, a maker. But it was the, you know, this fire in me that said, this is how I want to, you know, be in my life. Yeah.
Amazing. That's really brave and authentic at the same time. And how are you still applying your creativity today? How are you still engaging in creativity?
Well, it's kind of changed a little bit. Uh, I mean, I still write. and I still write poetry, mainly very badly, I have to say. So, but that's a part of my expression. And of course, there's the writing of the books, and there's now working with businesses and organisations and teams and things in terms of how do we tune people up, we might say,
Hmm.
to see the world differently. And it is a very funny skill set I've got. That combination of a very deeply held belief about beauty, which we're going to talk about, how that could be applied to ourselves, our leadership roles, the cultures of organizations, but then the products and things that we make, you know. But because of my long background in design, which has been, starting off designing books and then ending up, designing businesses, products and services and all the rest of it, I'm very interested in the application. So how, there's the why, but then there's the how. How is this going to be applied? How are we going to make it? And so that's kind of how I'm applying my creativity today. And the joy I get is about releasing the potential in others, and
Mhm.
I enjoy that a great deal. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And speaking about joy, I feel like for someone to speak and to know so intimately joy and beauty and the luminous side of life, they also
Mm.
have to know the sadness and depth of, I feel like saying despair. I don't know why that word comes right now, but yeah, the depths
Mhm.
of kind of despair and the non-beauty, the ugly. Have
Yeah, well,
you been through that?
I have. There's a great. There's an album by a band called the Stereophonics, which is quite old now, but the title is called "You've Got to Go There If You Want to Come Back." And I say that my origin story is about how I got to write about beauty. Is being in a very, very dark place. Mentally exhausted, psychologically exhausted, feeling quite bankrupt, really, in what I had to give the world. And in that despair came this memory of being on the beach as a young boy with my family on a family holiday, and seeing my mother, joyful in a thick knitted jumper, a skirt, bare feet, bare legs, which I never ever normally saw, laughing and joyful, and seeing my father, happy, which he often was. Actually, he was a lovely human being. Thinking about their relationship, thinking about my relationship to my brother and my sister, which was always very good. And then I see myself, and I thought, I'm at one with those I love the most. I'm at one with myself, and I haven't always been at one with myself. I'm at one with the natural world, and the only word that can describe that profound sense of homecoming was beauty. And that's how I got to, sit and write the first book, Why Beauty is Key to Everything.
Mm.
But I think that there is a shadowland in all of us, and we all suffer in this world in one form or another. The question is what do we do with that suffering? And my personal journey was, in the end, having to learn to embrace that part of me. It's very much a Buddhist principle in many ways, that we are made of the light and we are made of the dark. Um, and if we only pretend that we can only stand in the light, then we reject a huge part of who we are as people. And
Well,
we become more potent as human beings if we see the unification between those two things, rather than pretending that these things don't happen.
yeah.
Many people say that it's through the suffering, the cuts, the bruises, the dents, that we
Mm.
get as we go through life, and how we choose to respond to those is then dependent on the quality of how we become as human beings, and relate to other people. And I think that when people say to me, not always, but if it comes up and someone says to me, I'm really suffering or I'm in a very dark place, I can have a good idea about just quite how dark and how hard and painful that place can be for a human
Mm,
being.
mm.
And I think that having that ability to open yourself to that person and to say that I really understand the potential of how bad this is for you, I think is very important. But it means then that you stand in the world in a different way with the sense of potential of what then your purpose is in how you're going to be and what it is you're going to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I completely resonate with it. And now it makes me wonder, how does one get to such a place? Now, I feel like saying that the dark night of the soul. I don't know why these words just come as they do, but how do people get into such a dark place? And I have to say that this is kind of a loaded question, because what I have in mind is the sense of meaning that it might be lacking there, the sense of disconnect to the self. But how was it for you?
Do you mean how did I get there? How do I get
Yeah,
into such a dark place?
yeah.
I think that for me, there was 5 years of back-to-back work, working with very big organizations, big projects, multi-million pound projects that in one form or another I was integral to and leading on. Very innovative in what they were. I mean, and so there was a lot of hard work, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and each one of those projects did not turn out the way I wanted them to be, and I could not accept that. And acceptance is actually is how you, or non-acceptance is how you break.
Mm,
And I looked at all of those projects and I said, the only common denominator between all of those projects is me. So I must be the one that is the failure. And I turned in on myself and I tore myself apart, combined with a whole variety of other things that were going on in my life. And it totally broke me. But as someone said, it's through the cracks that the light gets in. And it made me question everything. And then it was a very long process of healing. And the thing is that it's in a sense a slow process, other than, mine was a slow process. I mean, for other people, it could be a death in the family, your death of the one you love the most in traumatic circumstances. Trauma is, each and every one of us will carry a life-changing story in one form or another. And as I say, then the question is what do you do with that? To me, it led me to want to write about beauty, and to talk about businesses being beautiful,
mm,
and giving me a very clear path in terms of how I wanted to move forward in my life. And it's not been easy, and I've met some not so nice people on my journey, shall we say, who pretended that they were doing something beautiful, but the reality is they weren't.
mm,
They know who they are, but that's okay.
mm. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for sharing that and for letting us into your soul's path and journey. And yeah, I cannot help but wondering, what is beautiful? What is because you mentioned they seemed like they were doing something beautiful, but in reality they were not.
That's right.
So how do we know when something is beautiful? How can we feel
Well, yeah. Well, stealing is not a very beautiful thing to do. It's
for
really
sure?
simple, Um, to steal something from somebody and pretend it's yours is absolutely not a beautiful thing to do.
For sure, for sure.
Um, it was Platonius who actually said that beauty is the only thing we know by instinct.
Mm,
It's not an idea; it is part of us. I know this to be true. I think the success of Do Design in particular um, really speaks to people. And, you know, we are hitched to beauty in every way that we can think of. Um, so it's a set of values, it's a set of behaviors. You know, to be compassionate, to be empathetic, is sort of part of that nature to do good. It was a lady called Iris Murdoch, who was a very famous philosopher, who said, "Good is not the name of an esoteric object, but should be the tool of every rational man."
Wow.
And so that idea then of it informs our behavior, our thinking, the language that we use. I mean, how do you interact with other people? I think listening, you can listen beautifully. Interruption is a form of violence. I once said that to a friend of mine who was interrupting me, and actually a few weeks later he called me up and he said, "What that thing you said to me when we were having the conversation?" And I completely forgotten about it. And I said, "Well, what was that, Lawrence?" And he said, "You said interrupting is a form of violence." And I said, "It is." He said, "You really made me go away and think about that." He said, "Because I interrupt a lot." And I said, "I know. It's why I said it." I think that so there's that whole spiritual, sacred, ethical dimension to us that could, we can choose to say, I'm going to try and do, beautiful things today, or where is the beauty in what it is I'm doing? And on one level, it can seem very superficial because we've kind of been told that we shouldn't talk about beauty,
Yeah.
and it's actually about nice colors and
Just physical things.
physical things, ephemeral things, feminine things, a lot of male things, which of course is a completely flawed idea. This is the overpowering of the rational, scientific measurement on everything. And if you can't measure it, then it can't be real. Beauty is one of those things that then gets put in the bottom drawer, and the door is locked. In architecture, you can't talk about beauty. There's a very complex relationship there and all the rest of it. Yet, if you go out into the world and you listen and read carefully and you're open to that word, you'll hear someone say, they had such a beautiful way of speaking. Those words were so beautiful. That meal was beautiful. They have such a beautiful way of behaving, and so on and so forth. And of course, the going on from that, where my sort of, where I start with all of this then is at a cosmic level that we say it is said, scientists say it, physicists say it, that the laws of the universe are said to be beautiful. There's a guy called Frank Wilczek who wrote a wonderful book called The Most Beautiful Question in the World. And the question is the world a work of art? And he says that because he says, Einstein's theory of relativity is said to be beautiful, or Paul Dirac's theory about how the smallest particles that we can't see them interact with each other over time and space and dance, so it's called string theory, is also said to be beautiful. And then leading on from that is, if we are molecularly made from the same material as the universe, ergo we are all forged an ancient star in one form or another, then we know beauty. That's back to Platonis's, thing about we know beauty is the only thing we know by instinct. It should be our North Star. It should be our guide and our compass in terms of what we do. And then following on from that, I say nature's deep design model is to create the conditions for all life to thrive without wasting a single atom. And if we want to thrive a bit longer on this planet, perhaps for all eternity, maybe we should be working from nature's playbook. And her principal modus operandi is regeneration. So beauty equals regeneration. Beauty doesn't equal sustainability. It's about, creating and describing something so much better than what we currently have. And And they are all the dimensions for me of how I think beauty should be the foundation for all life, and how we see the world and how we act and participate in it. Beauty is not extractive. It always gives back more than it takes, and yeah. And I think that's a very important point that at this moment in time we should be thinking very deeply about as a humanity.
Mm. That is really beautiful, and I realize that I'm saying that it's beautiful, and what that means is that it moves me. It makes me think. It makes me come closer to my own nature, and that's what beauty does, right? So beauty is in what we see. Beauty is a conversation, is an idea, and it's so
That's right.
fundamental.
That's right. And when so when I work or when I speak, and yes, back to the start of the conversation about design, working with people, designing things, we make things, we are makers. But when I work with people, I'm very interested in working with them soulfully. That's the bit that kind of does the work, really. And in Do Design, I talk about, tools, but it's actually the philosophy by which you hold that tool and the purpose by which you hold that tool will shape what it is you make in the world, and whether it's a good thing or not such a good thing. And to me, that's sort of, and maybe that's part of being lovingly disruptive at the same time, in terms of how you speak. And I gave a talk actually last year at the Royal Geographic Society in London. And in Do Build, I've got 13 design questions, but the last one is about legacy. And so I was talking about legacy, and afterwards, this lady came up to me and she said, I work for this very big organization. I won't say which one. But she said, you really got me with legacy. I don't think my company is interested in or working towards creating legacy. And you could see within that, I created some real friction between the values, how she held herself as a person, but the work she has to do every day. And it was not a good feeling for her, and my heart really went out to her because I thought, you're trapped, and I think that's very interesting. The other bit I think is really important, as I say, beauty speaks a different language, and it sort of backs to this thing about, I was asked once about what beauty could give the world of sustainability, and I said, well, it speaks a completely different language. With sustainability, you come with a moral philosophy, and it's not the one that's wrong. But telling people to stop doing things is kind of really a bit difficult, and it's very top down. It's very patriarchal. I'm not disagreeing, but what you're not offering me is a description of a world better than the one we currently have. So in sustainability, you don't talk about transcendence. You don't talk about joy. You don't talk about wonder. You don't talk about amazing. You don't talk about sensuality. We as human beings process the world through 32 senses, not 5, because they always work in blends and combinations of each other. This has been scientifically proven. This is not a point of view I have that I've made up. And so therefore, if all of those things that are related to this idea of a world made more beautiful, more potent, we look at the natural world and it gives us joy, because actually when we see flowers grow or we see trees growing or whatever, it says the land is fertile, it supports life, and we understand that completely. And so I said, we shouldn't be talking about sustainability. It's a cul-de-sac. We need to be the best that we can be. And so that's where that language becomes so much richer. And when we read, works of fiction or works of non-fiction, where that writer, sort of speaks to us, they're speaking to our imaginations, and to our souls, and to our potential. And it excites us, I think, actually, in many, many different ways.
Yeah, that's so true. It's not through shame or guilt or the image of an apocalyptic world that we actually drive the change. But it is through inspiring people, is through showing what is possible if something changes in your behavior, and not just behavior, but in your belief. I feel like for something to change deeply in someone, there needs to be a change of worldview and belief, and not just behavior.
Yeah, so we have to reimagine what is it is that is possible. And your point is absolutely right. You know, the apocalyptic, the no, the guilt, the shame, these are all destructive um, ideas, thoughts, and possibilities. And there's a great Buddhist saying, which is, you know, you can do more with one word that is life affirming than 10,000 which are destructive. You know, it's why I won't say, uh, it's why I won't go on Twitter and say, this is bad, that's bad, this is making me angry. I mean, there's a lots of people
Mm,
doing some very important work out there in terms of their activism, and I celebrate that. That's their job. But I won't join in that conversation because I hold the view that the work and the words, the ideas that I want to bring into the world is saying to people, there is another way in which we can be. And our intention should be about healing the world and healing other people, through what it is that we do, either as individuals or as businesses, for example, and I believe that, business is the engine of change. I think our political leadership, on the whole, without, with the small pockets of resistance, has failed. Business is the sort of the vessel, the fabric, through which we can bring a better world into play. And that's why I talk about businesses being beautiful and the need for that, relationship between those two things.
yeah, and before we move to the conversation about business being beautiful, which is one that I'm completely curious about. How do you feel or how do you think people can start to apply beauty to their own lives starting today? Because I feel like many of us listening right now might have the same feeling that I had when I first listened to you speak on Future IO,
Mm.
because I'm someone who has the concept of mindfulness, spirituality, so it's nothing new to me. But to hear all of this phrased and framed as beautiful has really been moving to me since that point. And I'm starting to wonder, how can we reimagine beauty in our lives and start to apply it more to our lives, to our personal lives, to the core of who we are.
In one way, I would say hold that question lovingly and really let it sit deep within you. Be conscious of it. Go for a long walk or walks, write, draw, whatever, but see it as an artistic question and a soulful question, spiritual question, and feel what manifests itself as you ask that question. So for me, well, so the memory that I shared with you, my origin story of how I got to write about this was, the question is how do I go home to me? What is my homecoming?
Mm,
And because I'd written a number of books prior to do design, I somehow felt that the writing as a creative process would be part of my homecoming.
mm,
And so that's how I ended up writing Do Design, and that's how I ended up writing about beauty. And I didn't do any research. I just wrote down what I believed to be true as what it meant to me as an individual, what it meant to me as a creative person, as someone that worked in business. And that book's in its seventh reprint. It's translated into 3 languages. I still get people emailing me from around the world saying, I've read this book and it's really touched me, or it's really helped me. It's helped me reconfigure what it is I do or how I do it. And so, what does beauty mean to me? And it could well be that to let that really in, you're going to have to accept there are certain things that are happening in your life, and you're not accepting, and maybe really opening yourself up to the universe. How do I open myself up? And how am I open? Vulnerability is an incredible power. And I remember actually giving a talk many years ago at a place called Great Dixter, which is a very famous house in England, created by a guy called Lucian's. And actually, it was a winter fair. And they asked me to give a talk on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. So it's a bit like a Sunday sermon in some respects. It was, and it was for a general audience, and I wasn't getting paid, but they just said, look, would you come and do it? Because we really like you. And I said, well, okay. And, I like the place, so I'll do it. But I thought, this audience won't be a business audience. This will just be people. And I had no idea how many people would turn up. Anyway, there was about 40 people in the audience. And it was the first time I told this story about how I got to write about beauty, where I was, how I was feeling. I kind of calibrate it, and I certainly don't tell the story as victim, but this is where I was, this is what happened to me, and this was a consequence of those things. Anyway, after the talk, quite a few people came up to me afterwards and said, by sharing your story, you laid down a huge doorway for us to all walk through. And I get a bit choked up now, sort of even thinking about that. And then when I got home, there was an email from a woman, and she said, I came to Great Dixter today with my struggling and ragged stepfamily. They were the words that she used.
Wow.
And I came to your talk. You filled my heart with optimism, and you convinced me that beauty was worth fighting for. And so I want to thank you. And I thought that was just really the most extraordinary thing, And so it has a huge power to it, is what I want to say.
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
That's really moving. I feel like you went there with such an open heart, and just letting people see you fully and seeing your past struggles in your journey. And that's what tends to happen when we open our hearts. It's an invitation for others to open theirs.
Yeah, and I think, I do this thing called Walk With Me. And that started as part of my own healing. And 15 years ago, we had a dog, a rescue dog. And because I work for myself, and, the studio was at home, she was with me all the time. But we would go for long walks. And but on my walks, I do a lot of thinking, a lot of processing. And I thought, well, maybe I just, I could do a walk with somebody else. And if that helps them, then that's great. But, and it's really simple. You turn up at, where I live, we go for a walk for 2 hours. Whatever comes up, comes up. The floor is yours in a sense. There's no agenda. I listen. And I'm really happy to put my own skin in the game in terms of, so it is a form of therapy. I'm not a trained psychologist in any way, shape or form, but I'm not sitting there going, and how do you feel about that? Or, I say, well, this is what happened to me. And a lot of people have said, I've never had a conversation like that before. I'm bringing things up, which I'm holding deep within me, and I'm not showing to the rest of the world. And you're giving me the space and the voice, and the walking is interesting. And, thank you, because you said at the beginning of our conversation, see this as a walk. Is when you walk with someone, you walk alongside them. And there is something profoundly different to sitting down over a table or wherever having a conversation. And it allows for silence, and that silence to be filled by the natural world. It allows for reflection. Walking is almost like a sacred container of trust. You are with someone, and you are holding that someone. And it's very interesting because the thing that comes up in the end is the truth. The thing that is causing the friction. Um, they can't help themselves, and it's my job then, or my work in a sense, to let them explore what that really means to them. And if I can then share, you know, ideas, thoughts, possibilities, wisdom on how they could see that differently, then that's what I do. And of course, I get to know a human being who's a complete stranger to me very deeply. I'm not really good at small talk, I'm afraid. I'm really interested in the heart of the matter, in a sense, and that's where I like to dwell, and that's where I like to live. I think it's where it's the richest, most rewarding work is done. And I think that for these people, it's like it makes me reflect a lot about organisations that therefore I'm not coming with my full vulnerability. I'm not open because actually I'm in an environment which is run hierarchically, patriarchically. It's run on fear potentially. If I show weakness or if I show vulnerability, it's seen as weakness. No wonder so many people are going, I really don't want to work like this. And I kind of say, but if the whole person turns up for work, you get so much more than if only half the person turns up for work. That's a big learning that I've got. And it's why, I talk about not so much leadership, but cultures of generosity. If we create cultures built on the principle of generosity, then it gives so much more space for something more enriching to happen. And then, and that's where what we should be talking about is the growth of the human being rather than the growth of the business.
I do feel really moved by what you're saying, and I resonate with everything. And this is kind of a new concept that I'm hearing, that showing up at work, you're showing up with your whole self, not just with your work self. And this concept of work-life balance, I feel like it's so outdated because it's not your work and your life. You are alive even when you are in business or at work. And I feel like it's, as you say, it's a lot more enriching and fulfilling to do business or anything at all with a full person, not just with one side of them. Like, I'm gonna put my business face, and I'm gonna come here in a very sterile way, and I'm gonna just care about the numbers. And I feel like that it's not just toxic, but it's also very, I don't know, depleting of spirit, I have to say.
Yeah, that's right. And, obviously there will be people on listening to this conversation, which will be very comfortable with the idea of our spiritual selves as a kind of just a spiritual. Some people would say, well, I believe there's a God, and, there could be and that's all okay. But I think that we are all spiritual. And and in a sense, the reason why I kind of fell over as badly as I did is because I wasn't feeding my spiritual need. And I'd really just ignored it, and rather than really understanding that, there has to be daily acts of restoration to ourselves and to others, and I think that there's a big sea change and a big shift going on, and I think the pandemic, particularly, has kind of really shifted it up a gear, where that idea about the requirements of how we live a life better, a life well lived, a life where we are feeding our spiritual selves, whether that is walking in nature, connecting to philosophies like Buddhism, Taoism, or more formal religions where we worship a god or gods. We are turning to all of those things because we understand that without those, we are actually, ghosts in a machine called life in many ways. And that's where I think there is so much psychological trauma because people aren't connecting to themselves in the way that they need to live, good lives. Um, it's where my critique really of the economy and cultures that we created, the materiality of the economy that we've generated, actually completely ignores the idea that can't be measured, the beautiful, the mystical, the sacred, are things that aren't worthy of attention and our time. Whereas what is proven is actually should be at the top of the list of what we are attending to, and the material nature of our world needs to be at the bottom.
I could not agree more with that, and I totally. I think it's hard for anyone to to talk to you and not be moved. I mean, I just feel like you're speaking straight to my soul, and yeah, thank you for that. And I cannot help but wonder, how are you bringing all of this philosophy into the business world? How is business receiving it? Because I have to be honest, that the first time that I heard beautiful business was the first time that I heard those words coming together.
Hmm. Well, it's a lot to do with how you frame it, what you present. I mean, obviously, there's two books I've written now, Do Design and Do Build, How to Make a Leader Business of World. It's a very personal form of curation that I've spent a very long period of time putting together. And the first piece of work, somebody actually said to me, he came on one of my programs. He several years later, actually, we were talking, and he said to me, "What you did on that program is you gave me a massive reset," and I wasn't expecting that. He said, "So before we got into and then we got into the doing, but I couldn't have thought about how I did things differently without that reset." And so, the first piece of work we have to do is get people to reconnect to this idea that beauty is this, in one, simple, but on the other hand, complex philosophy and idea that is absolutely fundamental to their core human nature. To sort of backtrack a little bit, so we put a whole variety of different things together as to kind of allow that lens to feel, profound. So, I mentioned Frank Wilczek. We use Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote this wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and she talks about being a Native American. She talks about her knowledge of the natural world through her Native American knowledge, but that's a more mystical knowledge, practical knowledge. But she's also a scientist and a biologist. But she writes and speaks so eloquently. We connect people to the idea of craft. So craftsmanship is very important to me, and so on and so forth. Initially is confusing for people in terms of saying, here's a bunch of stimulus that I want you to read. And actually, we use a guy called John O'Donoghue, who died many years ago, but he wrote a book called Divine Beauty. And he, in the end, wants to take you to his God and theology. But actually, in so doing, he writes about the profound way in which we are so connected to ourselves and to the world through everything that could be described as beautiful. And so, in a sense, the first thing to do is to use that as a form of stimulus, to use it as a foundation for dialogue. So I've learned that the way that you really change people's ways of seeing the world is through dialogue, based on questions and conversation, and then you can move that into exercises and whatever else. But that's where the profound shift starts to happen. And then once you've seen, you can't unsee, and once you know something differently, you can't unknow it. And so again, that's the form of disruption, in a sense of, we're going to give you this very powerful framework that you can embrace, and then it gives people the confidence to let go of that they up until that point have used on a daily basis or believed to be true. And then we connect that then to those principles and ideas around regeneration and the idea that, nature's design model is one that perhaps we should be reconnecting to. So yeah, there's a lot of rewiring that needs to be done. But then giving people a framework through which they can ask questions. And a lot of people have said who have come on our programs, who we've worked with, is that's been the really powerful bit. And as I said, then because of my background as a business innovator, as a designer of many different things, we move then into this very practical approach in terms of how. There's a why and there's a how, and then we can give people ways of then how they're going to explore that, and to ask those big questions. So we were working with a leadership team last year, at the end of last year, and it was about how do we make our business more beautiful. And towards the end of the session, I said, well, what if you took, and it's a huge estate in England. I said, well, what if you took your entire 255 acres off grid? What if you completely redesigned it to be totally regenerative? And they just looked on their eyes and they got so excited then. And I said, so, how are you going to do that? So let's design it. Let's get into the design of that now. And so what you've then got is a thirst and appetite, this idea that they are doing something beautiful. And what would it need? What would it take to get you to go off grid? And that was just an incredible exercise in watching them go on that journey, and we're supporting that as they go.
I love it. I love it. It is really inspiring. And you mentioned programs. What kind of programs are you building and offering to, and to whom?
Yeah, well, so we run a 6-part program, which we run every other week. There's quite a lot of work that kind of needs to go into that. We can run it completely online. We can do it as a hybrid. We can do taster sessions for people. With the 6-part program, there's a 10-part one as well, but we work in very small groups of five to 8, because everybody needs to be seen, everybody needs to be heard. No one is allowed to hide. It has to be a deep dive, and that's proven to be very, very powerful. So we've done that in open programs. We've done that with leadership teams around the world. I can go in and consult, so on a sort of one-on-one basis, and we can do executive briefings, and we can run days for people. We can run a 1-day or 2-day program, depending on really what the appetite or the budget is in terms of what people want to do. Advisory roles. So actually, I've just been approached by a very large architectural practice that is going to be about 1,000 strong architects who are very interested in working with me on how they vision the future for them. And that's a very exciting project. Actually, I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. And you did mention questions. I remember that saying that the questions that you ask yourself, your life is going to respond to that. So when we think about business, what are the most important questions that a business should ask, or a business leader, owner should ask themselves if they want to build a beautiful business?
Well, we've got in Do Build, there's 13 design questions. On the one hand, they seem very simple questions, but they're designed in a way to be to really ask quite profound questions. And of course, everyone's got their toolkit. How you're going to design this thing, or we've got a toolkit for this and toolkit for that, but they're very rational. And I think we have to bring those two things together. So the first design question we got is, does it matter? And I say, there's lots of stuff written about purpose and purpose-driven brands and led brands and all the rest of it. And I said, but there's a problem for me. There's a slight problem with purpose, which is there's a man in the Kremlin who's got a lot of purpose, and the world certainly doesn't need that. And there's some other folks around the world who also have a lot of purpose, and we don't need that either. So I think we have to ask a different question, which is, does it matter? So if you're a businessman, what does the world need and why does it matter? Does it matter to me? Does it matter to my team? What is the contribution that I can make? There is, I find, then the true reason. So the mattering, as I call it, because we say beauty is a verb, not a noun, to do
Mm.
beauty. The mattering is really a really big question, a deep question, to think about how that, really thinks about your business and what it is you're bringing to the world. And then the second one is it transformative? Um, and that could be a big thing or a small thing, but the idea of transformation is very important. Is it regenerative? What is your definition of regeneration? In terms of the again, the sort of contribution you're making to communities, to ecology, to economy. It can also be based on the principles of it being circular.
Mm.
How is your supply chain regenerative? Carbon offsetting doesn't really do it, folks, I'm afraid. You've got to stand up and be counted through everything that you do. And so these design questions are, and the last one is, how will we create legacy?
Mm.
And unfortunately, we got to change the time horizon in which we operate in. Somebody once said marketing is like harvesting money for the quarterly numbers.
Mm.
We measure success in quarters. VC, sees a time frame as 10 years as a very, very long time for a business to start and exit. But as Versbacher, who one of the co-founders of Climeworks, who I write about in the book, who build these machines to suck huge quantities of CO2 out of the atmosphere, all their money was privately raised because he said you cannot build a regenerative business on a time frame of 5 years. It's just not possible, really. So I think that it allows people to really think very deeply about the nature of their business, the nature of how they run those businesses, the nature of their business model. And we've over the last 8 years have built quite an interesting library of businesses we believe to be beautiful in a whole variety of different ways. And so we can say, look, there is another way, there's another design model, that you
Mm.
could use that could be so much better. And I think that in the book I write about this idea of the total, which actually was taken from a guy called Gabriel Bramby, who ran a company called Granville's Brook, which was an axe company, which he totally transformed a number of years ago now. But he talked about the total, and the total is what you take, what you make, and what you waste. And that
Mm.
is the basis on which we should, thinking about that. And I think that I think there's a different set of metrics and values that we need to measure. So we need to move from an economy that's extractive to an economy that's regenerative. And we've got a whole series of questions that we put, or we're saying, well, an extractive economy is about what you take. A regenerative economy is about what you contribute. So what is your contribution? And so that's a way of really interrogating, every aspect of a business to think about how it becomes beautiful.
I have actually loved the questions in the book. I actually have both here with me. And
Right.
the last one, which was, do you leave a legacy? I think something around that. That
Yeah.
really, really stuck with me. And I started to think about how I am the receiver of someone else's legacy. So I am the result of what someone else built as their legacy, and someone else will be the result or will receive the result of what I built as legacy. And it just made me feel like whatever I am working on has to have in mind the long-term view and the impact long-term, not just for my own life or for my own immediate benefit.
Yeah, I think that's right. And with this big architectural practice that I'm starting to work with, their vision is by 2030, all their building design has to be regenerative, right?
Mm.
And that's a really, I mean, that's massive. That's a huge mission. And we were having a really interesting discussion around it then. Well, what does that mean? And how might you realize that? But holding those questions in mind, I think gets you to think more profoundly and more deeply about what it is you do in the now. Because it's only in the now where we change the future. And I should remind myself of that actually a little bit more often. But
it's always like that.
It is always like that. It is always like that. But I thought about those design questions over a very long period of time, and as I say, it's not a toolkit; it's a framework. And anyone reading those questions can understand them for themselves. They're not complicated, but they could be applied at an individual level, but they could also apply at a very strategic level. A business is thinking about, its next 10 years, say, and then, and I'd say, so why does your business matter? And I think it's different to saying, what is the purpose of your business? I think there's more pressure in that question. Why does your business matter? I think it's the universe asking that question then, rather than, what gets you out of bed on a Monday morning type thing. And we've got to have that too, but and they are definitely connected. I mean, it's a more universal question that you're being asked, I think.
Because you can have many things getting you up in the morning and getting you excited, but does it really matter? And it comes down to that.
Yeah, and I think in a sense, I mean, even though when I wrote Do Design, it was, as I said, I wrote it to write myself home, but it really mattered to me. And that idea of writing about beauty really mattered to me, and I gave all of myself in writing that book. And in 2016 said, I think business needs to be beautiful. And it's really funny. Beauty had been on my mind for a long time. I mean, I can trace it back to 2011, maybe even earlier than that, where I was sort of talking about it, but it hung around. As good ideas tend to do, sort of, quietly tapping you on the shoulder, saying, I think you should give me a little bit more attention because this is really important.
It's true.
And I think that, in writing that book, I also tried to write it in a universal way, that anyone could pick it up. Everyone can understand what it is I was saying, rather than using lots of words which were, very long and very clever, and only if you really understood those words, you could really understand what was being said. And I just thought, life's too short for that. Poetry, songwriting, you can say some profound things that really touch people's soul. And so in the program, actually, I talk about the poetic brief. It's not in any of the books as such, but I talk about this thing about there needs to be two briefs in the world. One is the technical brief, and one is the poetic brief. And the story behind that is, as a young man, I worked for some very powerful contemporary art galleries, and I got to work with some amazing artists like Anselm Kiefer, like Helen Chadwick, Andy Warhol's estate, Gerhard Richter, and a guy called Cecil Collins. And my job was to design the exhibition catalogues for these artists, and no expense was ever spared. And in the briefing that I had for Cecil, Anthony said to me, Anthony Doffé, he said, now, Alan, Cecil's work, they're very jewel-like. They're very precious and they're very spiritual, which they are. And do you think you could design a catalogue like a jewel for me? Wow. And that was my brief, right? And I'm 21 years of age, and I'm going back on the train to Letchworth having jewel-like thoughts. But I used it as an interrogation, and I thought, well, what is a jewel? Well, a jewel is a surprise. It's a gift. It's priceless. It's sensual. It's tactile. It gives joy, so on and so forth. And so I started to use that interrogation to think about how I would design this catalog for Cecil.
Mm.
What would be the format? What would be the paper? What would be the layout? What would be the typeface? Who would print it? How it would be bound? What would the covering be? You know, all the aspects that would make this exhibition catalogue into a form. But it came from an esoteric question. And at the exhibition, Cecil comes up to me and he says, "You're Alan Moore." And I said, "I am." He says, "I'm Cecil Collins." I said, "I know." He said, "You designed the catalogue." I said, "I did." He said, "You've designed the most beautiful catalogue I've ever had, ever in my life." And he
Mm.
was 89 years of age, and
Wow.
he died the next year. And so I used this story, and I used then the exercises thereafter to say, so what would be your poetic brief for what it is that you're doing? Because you cannot quantify it. I'm sure McKinsey wouldn't, or Accenture, or would be talking about poetic briefs, but bringing that more poetic, spiritual question allows you maybe to get insights and answers into ways of doing things that you wouldn't normally do if you just had the technical brief. You know, how is someone going to feel when they hold this thing in their hand, or whatever it is that they're doing, or standing in a building or in a garden, or the poetic brief could apply to so many different ways and different forms.
That really speaks to me. I realize now that I used to relate to, because my career is in communication, and I was always thinking about the projects that I want to communicate or speak about, that I want to help communicate better, are like a diamond. And a
Mm,
diamond is not there to be kept in the closet. A diamond is there to be taken out. And I've
mm,
always had this reference. How is this business or project or whatever we're speaking about, how is it a diamond, and how are we getting it out of the closet? So
mhm,
I'm really going to sit with that question. How can we look at a project and not be so stuck in the technical part of it, but more in the soul part of it, making it a
mhm.
jewel?
Yeah.
How can it become a jewel? Beautiful. So I have here do build, how to make and
Mm.
lead a business the world needs. So this is a book for anyone who's aiming to build a meaningful business, and not only a meaningful life, right? And I have also here, do design why beauty is key to everything. Um, and this is about how we bring beauty into our lives and design our lives and anything for that matter. I'm so grateful that you mentioned the books throughout our conversation, and I'm curious, where can people find them? How can we, I don't know, what link should I put in the description?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you can buy them on Amazon. You could buy them from any decent bookstore, obviously. Uh, you can go to the Do Book Co. Website. There you can, buy the book as a bundle. So if Do Book, you can the Do Design book is also an audio book, as well as an e-back and a paperback. And I think
Mm,
for a little extra money, you can get an e-version as well as a paperback version. Do Build is not audio, but it is an e-book as well as a paperback book.
mm. But
Um,
are they designed to be, or are they thought to be experienced together, or do they come separate?
I think you can either, I mean, they're very short books, so it's not a massive read. But I would say I never really designed them to come together because I hadn't really thought about Do Build when I wrote, Do Design. But Do
Mm,
Design really is this sort of much broader foundation to what beauty means in a sense. And I think it's a useful tool to help people think much more exploratory about the nature of themselves and the work that they do and creativity and stuff. And I do write about business at the end of that. I put some examples in. So, and Do Build really is, you're a businessman and you're a startup, or, you're really thinking about how do I transform my business into something that's going to be better than what we currently have. So they're not hugely expensive, so I would say buy both, obviously. But
Great, great.
but you don't have to if you don't want to.
And on your website, there's a newsletter, if I'm not wrong,
That's
right?
right.
Can you tell us more about it?
So living beautifully, I put together just to say this is how beauty can really be part of our lives. So there's beautiful conversations. I mean, it's just stuff that I've curated and found as I go along. So it could be an artist talking about art, or a musician, or it could be an economist talking about regeneration or something. But somehow or other, it's about making the world a better place. But there's beautifully made, which could be anything from a ceramicist to a very high end piece of technology. Um, Beautiful architecture, beautifully restorative, beautiful food, which could be it could be about a particular restaurant or a way of cooking, but it could also be about big themes like regenerative agriculture, or how do you restore land that is incredibly depleted. There's insights that can be quite technical, so we can get into some really nitty gritty stuff. And there's a thing about leadership and books. And the reason why I do that, and they're quite big, these newsletters, is because what I'm showing is that beauty is around us all the time. There are many, many people invested in, they may not use that word in their own way, but in a sense, they're all working towards acts of restoration. And this lives in our daily lives in so many different ways, and is a form of inspiration for people. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm definitely going to place a link in the description for that as well.
Thank you.
And now we're coming close to the end of this conversation, and I do feel very, very grateful for you letting us into your world, for showing us your vulnerability and your insights. And yeah, I just feel blessed to be at the other end of your wisdom. So thank you so much for being my guest to this podcast.
Well, Emma, thank you very much for inviting me, and I very much enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your listeners enjoy it too.
Thank you, and thank you everyone listening. I'll see you next time.